right. Do you think the banking crisis is over? And if not, why not?
Okay, no, I do not, by any stretch of the imagination, think that the banking crisis is over. In fact, I think it's rumbling underneath the surface. And the reason is because we had, 15 years of zero interest rate policies. So the problem that the banks that did go under, a big problem that they had, was that the value of their securities had declined dramatically as the central bank had raised rates. That is throughout the entire global banking system. So what's really happening right now is the popping of the largest, hard for me to call them asset, but I'll call them a debt bubble in history. No, I don't think this is over by any stretch of the imagination. It's just being hidden from view.
What do you see coming next with banks, and do you think it's going to be similar to 2008 when 3 banks collapsed in 2006 or 7, and then another 10, 20, 100 banks collapsed a year?
I do think that there are some similarities, but what I also knew, which is why I even started my urban farm, was that in 2008, when it became apparent to the whole world, the banking crisis did, that the system died at that point. So I think the crisis that we have that is not yet visible to the public, but is unfolding as we are sitting here and speaking, is much larger. Because what they did in 2008 was just bury it under a mountain of new money, and their solution, which has been the same solution since 1913, frankly, was to devalue the currency through inflation. And they haven't the central banks have not got control of the inflation that they caused and the problems that they caused, and raising rates aren't going to help. To be honest with you, what they're doing isn't working because we are at the end of this life cycle. So this next system, with the advent of the Fed Now accounts going into effect in July, and we also have the LIBOR SOFR transition, which we may or may not see any of those rumblings by June 30th, but there are rumblings, the biggest experiment in history on this debt bubble that is popping. I think this next crisis is going to make 2008 look like chump change. And it's going to scare the crap out of everybody, and that's when they're going to try and cram the CBDCs down everybody's throats.
Can you explain the difference between CBDCs and FedNow?
Well, yeah, the CBDC is the actual digital money of the central bank. The FedNow is the account in which they can put it in so that you, the public, has access to it. Simply put.
What do you see happening if and when they get the public to agree to something like that?
Well, it's not whether or not they're going to get the public to agree, because we've seen in a number of other countries that have forced their population into the CBDCs by demonetizing the money and creating crisis, or just by giving people free money. They'll spend what you give them. It's whether or not they will allow their paycheck to automatically go into the CBDCs. Will they continue to make deposits into that CBDC account? That's the big question mark, because we do vote with our pocketbooks or our wallets. That's how we vote. And that's been a big problem for those countries that have already made that attempt to get their population to accept the CBDCs. I can't answer that. My hope is no. And the public does not seem to want these CBDCs. But do I think they're going to try and cram it down our throats? Yes. And they'll do that through crisis.
What could the future look like with CBDCs? And do you think that would affect people's retirement or retirement plans at all?
100%. What a CBDC does, and the Fed has even admitted it in the International Monetary Fund, the IMF papers that they've written, is See, right now, when they make a policy, it takes roughly 12 to 18 months to flow through the system. Did they get what they want? So we're really starting to feel the impact of the rapid rates that the Fed did 12, 18 months ago, right? So this way, once they have the CBDC, then they can have their finger on that policy button 24/7, which is what they've said. So that if they want the consumer to go out and consume, and you're not consuming, what are they going to do? They're going to drop us into negative rates more deeply, so that you're sitting there watching your principal evaporate. And when you're sitting there watching your principal evaporate, what are you most likely to do? But once it's in CBDC form, they can dictate what you can buy with it, how long it even exists, which you're going to see that. At first, they're not going to shock you with anything because they want to lull you into a false sense of security to get you to use it. And they've talked many times about this. So at first, it's going to seem kind of normal, like people are used to credit cards. Most people are used to credit cards and debit cards and all of that. So, and of course they've heard all about the cryptocurrencies, and we see what's happening in that arena. And remember recently, I can't remember whether it was the BIS or the IMF, but they came out with a paper, basically private cryptocurrencies bad, central bank cryptocurrencies good. So they're trying to get you lulled into a false sense of security. And then once they have you there, and let's say that a lot of the population does make that deposit into that FedNow and CBDC account, right? And especially, we could go into a hyperinflation on the currency that's already out there, and then have the Fed controlling the value for a minute of the CBDC. So people go, oh, well, look this is really bad, but this is staying more stable. And I think that's really what's very, very likely to happen to get you to participate voluntarily. That, frankly, makes having physical gold and silver outside of that system critically important. Because if you have everything inside of their system that they have their finger on 24/7 and can dictate everything about it, they have you by the cojones. Right? So this is why it's absolutely critical for you to be as self-sufficient and independent in as many ways as possible. Food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because the more independent you are, the less control they will have over you. And they are attempting this. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I mean, I really have hope of a revolution. Ray Dalio also thinks that a revolution is coming, and I agree with him. And because of these repeatable patterns, just like the end of the currency's life cycle. I mean, these patterns, when you know what they look like, then you know where we are in that cycle, and you can get into a position to actually not just survive it, but thrive through it and come out the other side in a better position. But you better have physical gold and silver in your possession, or heaven help us, heaven help you.